The morning sun was just beginning to peek through the tall windows of downtown as David pulled his car into the parking lot of Bella Vista Restaurant. He sat there for a moment, looking at the building that now belonged to him. 3 months ago, he never imagined he would own a place like this. The elegant stone facade and the fancy gold lettering on the sign still felt surreal to him. David had worked his way up from nothing. 20 years ago, he was washing dishes in a small diner, dreaming of something bigger. Now, at 42, he owned 5 restaurants across the city. Each one told a story of late nights, hard work, and determination. But Bella Vista was special. It was his biggest investment yet, and he had big plans for it. He checked his watch. It was just past 11 in the morning, right between the breakfast and lunch rush. Perfect timing to see how things really worked when the staff thought no one was watching. David believed in managing from the ground up. He had learned long ago that you could tell everything about a business by watching how employees treated customers when they thought the boss wasn't around. David looked down at his clothes and smiled. He was wearing his favorite pair of jeans, a simple blue polo shirt and comfortable sneakers. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed owner. That was exactly how he wanted it. He had purposely dressed down for this visit. The previous owner had always worn expensive suits and made a big show of walking through the restaurant. David wanted to be different. He wanted to see the real picture. The restaurant had been struggling under the previous management. The reviews were mixed, staff turnover was high, and profits were declining. David had bought it at a good price, but he knew it would take work to turn things around. He had spent the last 3 months working behind the scenes, updating the menu, improving the kitchen equipment, and reviewing the finances. But he hadn't met most of the staff yet. Today was the day to change that. As he walked toward the entrance, David noticed the beautiful flower boxes that lined the front of the building. The previous owner had let them become overgrown and messy, but David had hired a landscaping company to clean them up. Now they were full of bright red and yellow flowers that made the whole place look more welcoming. The heavy glass door opened with a soft chime, and David stepped inside. The interior was everything he remembered from his first visit. High ceilings with exposed wooden beams, warm lighting that made everyone look good, and tables set with crisp white tablecloths. The walls were decorated with paintings of Italian countryside scenes, and soft jazz music played in the background. The lunch crowd was starting to trickle in. David could see a young couple at a corner table sharing a pizza, an older man reading a newspaper while drinking coffee, and a business meeting happening near the window. The atmosphere was exactly what he had hoped for when he bought the place. David approached the hostess stand where a young woman with short brown hair was organizing menus. She looked up with a bright smile that seemed genuine. "Good morning." "Welcome to Bella Vista. Table for 1?" she asked cheerfully. "Yes, please. Something quiet where I can just relax and watch the room," David replied, returning her smile. "Perfect, I have just the spot." She grabbed a menu and led him to a small table near the back of the dining area. It was exactly what he wanted, a place where he could observe everything without being too obvious about it. David settled into his chair and looked around. The service seemed smooth so far. He watched as servers moved between tables, taking orders and delivering food. The kitchen appeared to be running efficiently based on how quickly plates were coming out. Everything looked professional and organized. A few minutes later, a waitress approached his table. She was probably in her 30s, with blonde hair, pulled back in a ponytail and a crisp white uniform. Her name tag read Jennifer. She walked over with a confident stride, but David noticed something in her expression that seemed a bit cold. "What can I get you to drink?" she asked, not making eye contact and pulling out her order pad. "Just a coffee, please. And could I see a menu?" "I might order something light," David said politely. Jennifer nodded without enthusiasm and walked away. David watched her go, noting how differently she had greeted him compared to how the hostess had welcomed him. He made a mental note to pay attention to how she interacted with other customers. While he waited for his coffee, David pulled out his phone and started reviewing some emails about his other restaurants. He was still getting used to managing multiple locations, and there was always something that needed his attention. but he tried to stay focused on observing the staff and customers around him. The coffee arrived a few minutes later. Jennifer set it down without a word and walked away before David could ask any questions about the menu. He found this behavior odd, but decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was having a bad day, or maybe she was new and still learning. David sipped his coffee and continued watching the room. He noticed that Jennifer seemed to have a very different attitude with different customers. When she served the young couple, she was friendly and chatty. With the businessman, she was professional and efficient, but with David, she had been almost dismissive. He wondered if it was just his imagination. Maybe he was being too sensitive. After all, he had been dealing with subtle discrimination his whole life, and sometimes it was hard to tell the difference between bad service and something more problematic. David decided to test his theory. He needed to use the restroom anyway, so this would be a perfect opportunity to see how Jennifer would respond to a simple request. He had learned over the years that these small interactions often revealed people's true character. The restaurant was getting busier now. More customers were coming in for lunch, and the servers were moving faster to keep up with demand. David could see that the kitchen was handling the rush well, which was a good sign. The food coming out looked delicious and was being served at the right temperature. He finished his coffee and looked around for Jennifer. She was taking an order at a nearby table, laughing at something the customer had said. When she finished, she walked past David's table without acknowledging him, even though his coffee cup was clearly empty. David raised his hand slightly to get her attention. Jennifer saw him but took her time walking over, stopping to chat with another server along the way. When she finally reached his table, she had the same cold expression as before. "Need something?" she asked, tapping her pen impatiently against her order pad. "Could you tell me where the restroom is?" David asked politely. What happened next would change everything. Jennifer looked at him with an expression that David recognized all too well. It was a look he had seen many times before, usually right before someone said or did something that would reveal their true feelings about people who looked like him. The moment stretched out as Jennifer seemed to consider his request. David waited patiently, hoping he was wrong about what he was seeing in her eyes. But deep down he knew that this simple question was about to become something much bigger. Jennifer looked at David with a blank stare that seemed to go on forever. Her eyes moved up and down, taking in his casual clothes and simple appearance. David could feel the judgment in her gaze, and his stomach began to tighten with a familiar feeling he had hoped to avoid today. "The restroom," Jennifer repeated as if she hadn't heard him correctly the first time. "Yes, please. Just need to know where it is," David said calmly, keeping his voice friendly and polite. Jennifer shifted her weight from one foot to the other and crossed her arms. "Well, our restrooms are for paying customers only," she said, with a tone that suggested this should be obvious. David blinked in surprise. He looked down at his coffee cup, then back up at her. "I did order something. I'm drinking coffee right now." "That's just coffee," Jennifer said dismissively, waving her hand as if his order didn't count. "I mean real customers, people who order actual food." The response caught David off guard. In all his years of running restaurants, he had never heard of a policy that required customers to order food just to use the restroom. Coffee was still a purchase, and any decent restaurant treated coffee customers with the same respect as everyone else. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand," David said, trying to keep his voice level. "I paid for my coffee. Doesn't that make me a paying customer?" Jennifer rolled her eyes and let out a small sigh as if David was being deliberately difficult. "Look, the restrooms are out of order right now anyway. Maintenance is working on them. You'll need to go somewhere else." David glanced around the restaurant. Something didn't add up. If the restrooms were out of order, wouldn't there be signs posted? Wouldn't other customers be complaining or asking about it? He had been watching the dining room for the past 30 minutes, and he hadn't seen any indication that there was a problem with the facilities. Just as he was about to respond, David watched a white family with 2 young children walk past their table. The father approached Jennifer with a smile. "Excuse me, could you point us toward the restroom? The kids really need to go." the man said cheerfully. Without hesitation, Jennifer's entire demeanor changed. Her face lit up with a warm smile, and her voice became sweet and helpful. Of course, just go down that hallway and turn right. You can't miss it. The family restroom is perfect for you with the little ones. Thank you so much, the father replied, and the family headed off in the direction Jennifer had indicated. David sat there in stunned silence. He had just witnessed exactly what he feared was happening. The restrooms weren't out of order at all. Jennifer had lied to him directly, and now she had cheerfully directed another family to the exact same facilities she claimed were unavailable. The realization hit him like a punch to the stomach. This wasn't about restaurant policy or maintenance issues. This was about something much more personal and much more painful. Jennifer had looked at him and decided, based on nothing more than his appearance, that he didn't deserve the same basic courtesy she gave to other customers. David took a deep breath and tried to process what had just happened. Part of him wanted to stand up and walk out immediately. He had dealt with this kind of treatment before, and he knew how much it could hurt. But another part of him, the part that had built a successful business through determination and patience, told him to handle this carefully. I just watched you direct that family to the restroom, David said quietly, looking directly at Jennifer. The same restroom you told me was out of order. Jennifer's cheeks flushed slightly, but instead of apologizing or explaining, she became defensive. That's different. They're regular customers. They come here all the time. And how do you know? I'm not a regular customer. This is my first time talking to you, David replied, still keeping his voice calm. I know who belongs here and who doesn't, Jennifer snapped, her mask of politeness completely gone now. And I'm telling you, the restrooms aren't available for you. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Other customers at nearby tables had started to notice the conversation. David could see people glancing over, some with curiosity and others with concern. The comfortable atmosphere of the restaurant was beginning to shift. David felt his heart racing, but he forced himself to remain composed. He had learned long ago that losing his temper in situations like this only made things worse. People would focus on his reaction instead of the real problem. Could I speak with a manager, please? David asked politely. Jennifer let out a harsh laugh. The manager isn't going to tell you anything different. We have standards here. I'd still like to speak with them, David insisted. Jennifer shrugged and walked away without another word. David watched her go to the server station, where she started talking animatedly with another employee. He could see her gesturing in his direction and shaking her head dramatically. While he waited, David noticed that more customers were paying attention to what was happening. A woman at the next table kept looking over with concern. An older gentleman near the window had stopped reading his newspaper and was watching the situation unfold. David pulled out his phone and started to compose a text message to his assistant, but then stopped. He wanted to see how this would play out. As the owner, he needed to understand exactly what kind of environment his restaurant had become under the previous management. A few minutes later, Jennifer returned with a man in his 30s wearing a button-down shirt and tie. His name tag identified him as Tom, the shift manager. He looked uncomfortable and kept glancing around the dining room as if he was worried about causing a scene. Sir, I understand there's some kind of problem, Tom said, approaching the table with obvious reluctance. I simply asked to use the restroom, and your waitress told me it was for paying customers only, even though I ordered coffee. Then she said it was out of order, but I watched her direct another family there just a few minutes ago, David explained calmly. Tom looked back and forth between David and Jennifer. Well, sometimes we do have issues with people coming in just to use the facilities without ordering anything. But I did order something, David said, pointing to his coffee cup. And I was planning to order food as well. Jennifer stepped forward before Tom could respond. He's been sitting here causing trouble ever since he came in. I think he's just looking for problems. David couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had been nothing but polite and patient, even in the face of obvious discrimination. Now Jennifer was trying to paint him as the troublemaker. I haven't caused any trouble, David said firmly. I've been sitting here quietly, drinking my coffee and minding my own business. All I did was ask where the restroom was. Tom looked around nervously at the other customers who were clearly listening to the conversation. Look, maybe we can work something out here. Why don't you just order some food, and then there won't be any problem with using the restroom? The suggestion made David's anger flare, but he kept it under control. So you're saying I have to buy food I don't want just to use a basic facility that should be available to all customers? It's just our policy, Tom said weakly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but unwilling to contradict his employee. And what exactly is this policy? David asked. Is it written down somewhere? Do you tell all your customers they can't use the restroom unless they order food? Tom and Jennifer exchanged glances. Neither of them seemed to have a good answer to that question. David realized this situation was spiraling out of control, and it was time to reveal who he really was. David could feel the eyes of every customer in the restaurant turning toward their table. The quiet lunch atmosphere had completely disappeared, replaced by an uncomfortable tension that seemed to fill the entire dining room. Conversations at all other tables had stopped, and people were openly staring at the scene unfolding before them. Tom, the shift manager, was sweating now despite the restaurant's comfortable temperature. He kept looking around nervously, clearly aware that this situation was getting out of hand. David could see that Tom was caught between supporting his employee and trying to avoid a public scene that could hurt the restaurant's reputation. Look, sir, Tom said, lowering his voice and leaning slightly closer to the table. I'm sure we can figure this out without making a big deal about it. Maybe there was just some confusion. Jennifer immediately stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. There's no confusion, Tom. I know exactly what's going on here. This guy comes in here dressed like he just rolled out of bed, orders the cheapest thing on the menu, and then starts demanding special treatment. David felt his jaw tighten at her words. He had been called many things in his life, but never had someone been so openly disrespectful about his appearance and his right to basic service. The fact that she was saying these things in front of a room full of customers made it even more insulting. Special treatment? David repeated, his voice rising slightly for the first time since the conversation began. Asking to use the restroom is special treatment? You know what I mean, Jennifer shot back, crossing her arms defiantly. You people always come in here thinking you can get something for nothing. The words hit the dining room like a thunderbolt. Several customers gasped audibly, and David saw an elderly woman at a nearby table shake her head in disgust. A young couple near the window pulled out their phones and started recording the interaction. Tom's eyes went wide with horror. Jennifer, that's enough. You need to calm down right now. But Jennifer was beyond listening to reason. She had crossed a line, and instead of backing down, she seemed determined to keep going. No, I'm tired of this. We're a nice restaurant with standards, and I'm not going to let just anyone walk in here and disrespect our establishment. David stood up slowly from his chair. At his full height, he commanded the attention of everyone in the room. His voice was calm but carried a weight that made everyone listen carefully. Ma'am, I have been nothing but respectful since I walked into this restaurant. I ordered a drink, I sat quietly at my table, and I made one simple request. I haven't raised my voice, I haven't been rude, and I certainly haven't disrespected anyone. Jennifer rolled her eyes dramatically. Oh, please, don't try to play the victim here. I know your type. My type? David asked, his eyebrows raising. And what type would that be exactly? The question hung in the air. Everyone in the restaurant seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see how Jennifer would respond. Even she seemed to realize that she was about to say something that could get her into serious trouble. Tom quickly stepped between them. Okay, that's enough. Jennifer, I think you should go take a break in the back. I'm not going anywhere, Jennifer declared. This is my section, and I'm not going to be intimidated by some troublemaker who thinks he can come in here and cause problems. A man at a corner table stood up and approached the group. He was well dressed in a business suit and looked like he might be a regular customer. Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing this conversation. I've been coming to this restaurant for years, and I've never seen a customer treated this way. Jennifer turned toward the businessman with a completely different expression. Her angry scowl melted away, replaced by a nervous smile. Oh, Mr. Peterson, I'm sorry you had to witness this. We're just dealing with a difficult situation. Difficult situation? Mr. Peterson replied, looking confused. From what I can see, this gentleman asked a simple question and has been treated terribly. I use the restroom here every time I come in, and I've never been told I needed to order food first. More customers began speaking up. The elderly woman David had noticed earlier called out from her table. Young lady, I saw you direct that family to the restroom just a few minutes ago. Why are you telling this man something different? Another customer, a middle-aged woman dining alone, added her voice to the growing chorus. I've been watching this whole thing, and he's been nothing but polite. You're the one being rude. Jennifer's face went from flushed to pale as she realized that the entire restaurant was turning against her. Instead of apologizing or trying to defuse the situation, she became even more defensive. You don't understand what's really happening. Here, she said loudly, addressing the room. These people come in and try to take advantage of good businesses. They look for any excuse to cause trouble and make us look bad. The silence that followed was deafening. David could see the shock and disgust on the faces of customers throughout the restaurant. Several more people had pulled out their phones and were recording the encounter. Tom looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Jennifer, you need to stop talking right now and go to the office. I will not be silenced by political correctness, Jennifer continued, her voice getting louder and more shrill. I know what I see, and I know what's really going on here. David had heard enough. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. From it, he extracted a business card and held it up so that both Tom and Jennifer could see it clearly. I think it's time I introduced myself properly, David said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that made everyone in the restaurant pay attention. My name is David Thompson, and I believe you both need to see this. Tom squinted at the business card, trying to read the small print. David could see the exact moment when understanding dawned on the manager's face. Tom's mouth fell open, and all the color drained from his cheeks. What does it say? Jennifer demanded, still oblivious to what was happening. Tom's hands were shaking as he took the business card from David. It says David Thompson, CEO and owner, Thompson Restaurant Group. Jennifer snatched the card from Tom's trembling fingers. As she read it, her expression changed from defiance to confusion to absolute terror. This can't be right, she stammered, looking back and forth between the card and David's face. Would you like me to prove it? David asked calmly. Tom, do you have the contact information for the owner of this restaurant? Tom nodded wordlessly, still in shock. Why don't you call that number right now? David suggested. I think you'll find it very interesting. The restaurant had become completely silent, except for the soft jazz music still playing in the background. Every customer was watching the drama unfold, and many had their phones out to capture what was clearly about to be a moment they would never forget. Tom fumbled for his phone with shaking hands, his face growing paler by the second as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Tom's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his phone. He kept looking at the business card, then at David, then back at the card again, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The entire restaurant had fallen completely silent, except for the quiet background music that suddenly seemed far too cheerful for the moment. Go ahead, Tom, David said gently, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. Call the number. Jennifer was staring at the business card, in her hands reading it over and over again. Her face had gone from angry red to a sickly pale color, and David could see her hands beginning to tremble, but she still seemed to be in denial about what was happening. This has to be fake, Jennifer muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. There's no way this is real. Tom finally managed to dial the number with shaking fingers. The phone rang once, twice, and then David calmly reached into his pocket and pulled out his own phone. The ringtone echoed through the silent restaurant, and everyone watched as David's phone screen lit up with Tom's call. The sound of the ringing seemed to go on forever, even though it was only a few seconds. David let it ring 3 more times before he answered, putting the phone to his ear while maintaining eye contact with Tom. Hello, this is David Thompson, he said into his phone, his voice carrying clearly through the quiet dining room. Tom's mouth fell open as he heard David's voice both through his phone and standing right in front of him. The phone slipped from his hand and clattered onto the floor. Several customers gasped, and David could hear someone whisper, "Oh my God," from across the room. Jennifer was still holding the business card, staring at it as if it might change if she looked at it long. "Enough. This can't be happening," she whispered. "This isn't real." David ended the call and put his phone back in his pocket. He looked around the restaurant at all the faces staring back at him. Some customers looked shocked. Others seemed fascinated by the drama unfolding before them. A few were still recording with their phones, capturing every moment of what was clearly going to be a story they would tell for years to come. "Tom," David said quietly, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "I think we need to have a conversation." Tom was frozen in place, his face white as a sheet. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. David could see the panic in the manager's eyes as he realized the full scope of what had just happened. I, Mr. Thompson, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." Tom finally managed to stammer out. David held up his hand to stop him. "We'll talk about this in a moment, but first I think Jennifer has something she'd like to say." All eyes turned to Jennifer, who was now visibly shaking. The business card had fallen from her hands onto the floor. She looked around the restaurant at all the customers watching her, many of whom were still recording. The reality of her situation was finally starting to sink in. I didn't know," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Didn't know what?" David asked, his tone remaining calm but firm. "That I was the owner? Or that treating customers, the way you treated me, was wrong?" Jennifer's eyes filled with tears, but David could see that they weren't tears of genuine remorse. They were tears of panic and fear for her job. She looked around desperately, as if hoping someone would help her out of this situation. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake. I was just trying to do my job." David shook his head slowly. "Jennifer, your job is to serve customers with respect and kindness. Your job is to make people feel welcome in this restaurant. What you did today wasn't a mistake, it was a choice." The elderly woman who had spoken up earlier stood up from her table and walked over to where they were standing. She looked directly at Jennifer with a stern expression. "Young lady," she said, in a voice that carried the authority of someone who had lived through many decades. "I watched this entire situation unfold. That man didn't do anything wrong. He was polite, he was patient, and he deserved better treatment than what you gave him." Other customers began nodding in agreement. Mr. Peterson, the businessman who had defended David earlier, also approached the group. "I've been coming here for 3 years, he said, looking directly at Tom. "I've never seen anything like this. If this is how your staff treats customers, I'm not sure I can continue eating here." David could see the fear in Tom's eyes growing stronger. Losing regular customers like Mr. Peterson would be devastating for any restaurant, especially one that was already struggling. "Mr. Peterson, please," Tom said desperately. "This isn't how we normally operate. This was just... we don't usually what?" asked the middle-aged woman who had also defended David. "Don't usually get caught treating people badly?" More customers were joining the conversation now, and David could see that the situation was becoming bigger than just him and Jennifer. The whole restaurant was talking about what they had witnessed, and people were pulling out their phones to call friends and family about what they had just seen. David realized he needed to take control of the situation before it spiraled completely out of control. He had made his point, and now it was time to handle this like the business owner he was. "Everyone, please," David said, raising his voice slightly to get the attention of the entire restaurant. "I appreciate your support, and I'm grateful that you spoke up when you saw something wrong happening. But now I need to handle this as the owner of this establishment." The dining room quieted down as customers returned to their tables, though David could see that everyone was still listening carefully to what would happen next. David turned back to Tom and Jennifer, both of whom looked like they wanted to disappear. "Tom, I need you to gather the entire staff in the back office. Everyone who's working today needs to hear what I have to say." Tom nodded quickly, obviously relieved to have something specific to do. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." As Tom hurried off to collect the other employees, David turned to Jennifer, who was still standing there looking terrified and defeated. "Jennifer," he said quietly, "I want you to think very carefully about what just happened here. Not just the part where you found out I was the owner, but everything that led up to that moment." Jennifer nodded miserably, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "I want you to think about how you would have felt if you were in my position," David continued. "If you had walked into a restaurant, asked a simple question, and been treated the way you treated me today." "I'm sorry," Jennifer whispered. "I'm so sorry." David studied her face for a moment, trying to determine if her apology was genuine or just fear talking. After 20 years in business, he had gotten pretty good at reading people. "We'll see," he said finally. "Right now I need you to go to the back office with Tom. We're all going to have a conversation about what it means to work at one of my restaurants." As Jennifer walked away with her head down, David looked around at the customers who were still watching him with interest and curiosity. He knew that what happened next would determine not just the future of his restaurant, but also whether these people would ever feel comfortable eating here again. David stood in the middle of the dining room for a moment, looking around at the customers who were still processing what they had just witnessed. Some were whispering quietly to each other, others were still holding their phones, and a few were simply staring at him with curiosity and respect. He walked over to Mr. Peterson's table first. The businessman looked up with an expression of amazement mixed with concern. "Mr. Peterson, I owe you an apology," David said, extending his hand. "What you witnessed today is not what this restaurant stands for, and it's certainly not the kind of service any customer should ever experience." Mr. Peterson stood up and shook David's hand firmly. "You have nothing to apologize for. You handled that situation with more grace than I would have. But I have to ask, how often does this kind of thing happen?" David appreciated the direct question. "Honestly, I don't know. I bought this restaurant 3 months ago, and today was my first unannounced visit. What happened here today tells me I have a lot of work to do." "Well, you've got my support," Mr. Peterson said. "I've been eating here for years, and I want to see this place succeed. But you're right. Changes need to be made." David made his way around the dining room, stopping at each table to personally apologize to the customers who had witnessed the incident. The elderly woman who had spoken up patted his hand and told him she was proud of how he had handled himself. The young couple who had been recording said they were impressed by his professionalism and that they would definitely be coming back. After speaking with all the customers, David made his way toward the back office. He could hear voices through the door. Tom was clearly explaining the situation to the rest of the staff. As David approached, the voices got quieter until the office fell completely silent. David knocked on the door and entered. Inside, he found Tom, Jennifer, and 4 other employees, 2 servers, a busboy, and the cook. Everyone looked nervous and uncertain except for Jennifer, who was sitting in a corner chair with her head in her hands. "Thank you all for gathering here," David began, closing the door behind him. "I know this is an unusual situation, and I'm sure Tom has explained what just happened out there." The staff members nodded quietly. David could see a mix of emotions on their faces. Some looked curious, others appeared worried about their jobs, and a few seemed genuinely upset about what had occurred. "First, let me introduce myself properly. My name is David Thompson, and I'm the new owner of Bella Vista. I bought this restaurant 3 months ago because I believed it had potential to be something special. Today was my first visit to see how things were really running." One of the servers, a young man who looked to be in his early 20s, raised his hand tentatively. "Sir, we had no idea you were coming. If we had known..." David held up his hand to stop him. "That's exactly the point. I didn't want you to know I was coming. I wanted to see how you treat customers when you think no one important is watching. And what I saw today was unacceptable." Jennifer looked up from her hands, her eyes red from crying. "Mr. Thompson, please. I know I made a terrible mistake. I was having a bad day and I took it out on you. It won't happen again." David looked at her carefully. "Jennifer, this wasn't about having a bad day. I watched you interact with other customers, and you were perfectly pleasant with them. You made a conscious choice to treat me differently, and we both know why." The room fell silent. Everyone was looking at Jennifer now, and David could see that some of the other staff members were uncomfortable with what they were hearing. "I've been in the restaurant business for 20 years, David continued, and I've learned that how you treat people when you think it doesn't matter tells you everything about a person's character." Tom spoke up nervously. "Sir, I want to apologize too. I should have handled the situation better. I should have stood up for what was right instead of just trying to avoid conflict." David nodded. "Tom, you're right. As a manager, you have a responsibility to ensure all customers are treated fairly. When you saw what was happening, you should have corrected it immediately." "I know, sir. I was caught off guard, and I didn't want to make a scene in front of the other customers." "But a scene was already being made," David pointed out. "Jennifer was creating a scene by treating a customer badly. Your job was to stop it, not enable it." The cook, an older man with graying hair, spoke up. "Sir, I've been working in restaurants for 30 years and I've never seen anything like what happened today. Most of us back here had no idea what was going on until Tom came to get us." David looked at the cook with interest. "What's your name?" "Robert, sir. I've been working here for 5 years, through the previous owner, and now you." "Robert, in those 5 years, have you ever seen customers treated the way I was treated today?" Robert hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. "Not exactly like that, no, sir. But I have noticed that some staff members seem to have preferences about which customers they like to serve." David felt his jaw tighten. "What kind of preferences?" "Well, sir, I probably shouldn't say. Robert, I need you to be honest with me. I can't fix problems I don't know about." Robert glanced around the room at his co-workers, then took a deep breath. "Some of the staff seem to give better service to customers who they think will tip well, and sometimes that judgment is based on how people look or dress." David nodded, grimly. This was what he had suspected, but hearing it confirmed made him realize the problem was bigger than just Jennifer. "Thank you for being honest, Robert. That's exactly the kind of information I need to hear." David turned to address the entire group. "Here's what's going to happen. First, Jennifer, I'm accepting your resignation. What happened today was not just a mistake or a bad day. It was discrimination and it has no place in my restaurant." Jennifer started to protest, but David held up his hand. "The decision is final. You can finish your shift today, but this will be your last day working here." Jennifer broke down crying again, but David could see that most of the other staff members looked relieved rather than upset by his decision. "Tom, you're going to remain as manager, but you're going on probation. Over the next 30 days, I'll be making more unannounced visits to see how you handle situations like this. If I see improvement, you'll keep your job. If not, you'll be looking for work somewhere else." Tom nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. I understand completely." David looked at the rest of the staff. "For everyone else, we're going to start fresh. Next week, I'm bringing in a training team to work with all of you on customer service, diversity, and inclusion. This training will be mandatory for everyone who wants to continue working here." The young server who had spoken earlier raised his hand. Again. "Sir, what if we have questions or concerns after the training?" "Good question. I'm going to be much more involved in the day-to-day operations of this restaurant. I'll be here regularly, and I want you to feel comfortable coming to me with any issues or concerns." David pulled out his business cards and handed one to each staff member. "My personal phone number is on there. If you ever see a customer being treated unfairly, or if you're not sure how to handle a situation, call me immediately." Robert smiled for the first time since David had entered the office. "Sir, I have to say, this is refreshing. The previous owner never cared much about how customers were treated as long as money was coming in." "Well, I'm not the previous owner," David said firmly. "I built my business on the principle that every customer deserves respect, regardless of what they look like, how they're dressed, or how much money they spend." David looked around the room one more time. "Are there any other questions?" The room was quiet for a moment. Then Tom spoke up. "Sir, what should we tell the customers who are still out there? They're all talking about what happened." David smiled, slightly. We're going to tell them the truth. We're going to apologize for what they witnessed, and we're going to promise them that it will never happen again. Then we're going to prove it with our actions every single day. As David prepared to leave the office, he turned back to the group one final time. Remember, you don't just work for a restaurant. You work for a place where people come to celebrate birthdays, anniversaries, first dates, and family gatherings. You have the power to make those moments special or to ruin them completely. I trust you'll make the right choice. David walked back into the dining room, where customers were still talking quietly about what they had witnessed. He knew it would take time to rebuild the restaurant's reputation, but he was determined to create a place where everyone would feel welcome and respected. The lunch rush was picking up again, and David watched as the remaining staff worked to serve their customers. He could already see small improvements in how they interacted with people. Word traveled fast in the restaurant business, and David knew that what happened today would either destroy his investment or become the foundation for something much better. He was determined to make sure it was the latter.